Welcome to Vectr, a free online vector imaging tool that we will use to start designing basic objects for laser cutting. In terms of layout, we have our canvas in the center where we will make our vector images. On the left is a panel with a variety of tools, and on the right is a properties panel where we will be able to make changes to some of the shapes and designs we make. Let's start out by making a shape by navigating to our Shapes panel. Here, I'm going to select a rectangle. Now, on my canvas, I'm going to click and drag my mouse to draw the rectangle. Now that we have a shape, you will notice some new information on our Properties panel. For example, we can change the color of the fill, or we can change the opacity of the rectangle. Now we're going to learn how to combine and subtract basic shapes to make more complex ones. Let's add a circle to our canvas by selecting it from the Shapes panel and then clicking and dragging our mouse on the canvas to draw one. It may be difficult to see the shapes in the same color, so let's change the circle to yellow using the Properties panel. After positioning the circle where I want, I'm going to select both shapes and focus on the contextual menu that pops up. If we click on this button, we will unite or add the two shapes together into a single shape. Because it's a single shape, when you send it to a laser cutter, it will only cut the outline. If you didn't unite them, the laser cutter would cut out two distinct shapes, and because they overlap, you would be left with a third shape as well. Looking at the rest of the pop-up menu, we can also subtract shapes. There are also a few other options that you can play around with, like intersect, exclude, and divide. In addition to dragging shapes in place, you can also use alignment tools to perfectly position two shapes together. First, select the shapes you want to position. Then use the alignment buttons in the Properties panel. You can choose to align left, center, right, top, middle, and bottom. Taking a look at our two shapes, it's best to mention at this point that when you're designing in Vectr, it may be helpful to decide on making shapes that you want to use for cutting as one color, like magenta, and shapes you want to engrave as another, like yellow. These colors are arbitrary, so choose whatever colors you like, but it will be helpful to organize your designs in this way. It's also worth noting that currently we are only talking about the fill color, which in traditional laser cut design is reserved for engraving. However, for the Glowforge in the PML, having a fill as opposed to a stroke won't matter, because you can assign what you want each shape to do independently. Note that if you are working with other laser cutters where the difference between fill and stroke matter, Vectr can produce a stroke by enabling the border option in the Properties tab. Sometimes when making complex vector shapes, tracing an image using the pen tool may be easier and more accurate than unifying and subtracting circles and squares. First, upload an image by using the Upload tool on the left panel. Then select the Pen tool from the left panel and click on a point at the edge of your image to start. We're now going to outline the image by clicking around the border. One of the features of the Pen tool is that if you click and hold on a new point and then drag that point out, it will bend or curve the line between those 2 points, allowing you to get a more organic shape. This can take a while to get used to, but it's a useful tool to learn. Once you've gone all the way around, you will now have a solid enclosed vector shape with no fill. Notice that the border or stroke option is enabled in the Properties panel and not the color or fill. Here I can change the color and thickness of the stroke. I can also enable the color property to give it a fill. Another feature of Vectr are the creative assets they've already designed for you to use, such as these arrows, or even figures like this one. It's important to note that while this looks like one object, if I select it and then right-click, I will have the option to ungroup this one object into its smaller parts. Now, moving them apart, I can see that this illustration is just a bunch of flat vector shapes. Feel free to explore the Assets tab more. Now let's do something more practical by designing a keyring for the Glowforge. Feel free to follow along if you wish, or just watch. There will be an opportunity for you to make your own after this tutorial. Let's start by selecting a shape, like a hexagon. Because this is the main shape, I know I'm going to want to cut it out of my material, so I'm going to assign it the color magenta, the color that I've chosen to indicate cutting. Next, I will grab the starburst shape and place it in the center of the hexagon. I want to engrave the starburst, so I'm going to give it the color yellow. Again, these colors are arbitrary and are just there to help me think through my design. Next, I know I need to cut a hole for my keychain, so I will grab the circle shape and place it towards the top right, making sure I'm not too close to the edge of my design. Since this is a cut, I could change this circle to magenta, but it would be hard to see. So instead, I'm going to select it and the hexagon shape and use the subtract option from the contextual pop-up menu to cut through the hexagon. You may have noticed that the starburst has seemingly disappeared. It's still there, it's just moved to a lower layer due to the subtraction. We can fix this by selecting the hexagonal shape and using the Send to Back button, which means move this to the base layer, and there you will see that the starburst reappears. Lastly, let's add some text to engrave by selecting the text tool on the left panel. Once you start typing, you will notice that the Properties panel has new options, including the ability to change fonts, sizes, colors, and alignment. I'm going to make this text yellow because I want to engrave it and place it on the bottom of my keychain. Because text is unique, it requires an additional step before it can be recognized as a vector image for laser cutting. With the text box selected, right-click using your mouse and select Create Outlines. You will see that now instead of a text box, each letter is its own unique vector shape. Only go through this step once you are sure on your text design, as you can no longer edit it once you create outlines. And we're done! Exporting from Vectr is simple and straightforward. Select the export icon on the Properties panel. Make sure that SVG is selected, and then click Download. You will probably see a file called untitled.svg pop up in your Downloads folder. That is the file that you will use to upload to Glowforge, so go ahead and rename it something useful. And that concludes our intro to Vectr.